Hey everyone, welcome to Erased, your weekly true crime fix dedicated to telling the stories of missing and murdered women of color. I'm your host Mooney, and today we will be talking about the case of the Saeed sisters. So let's jump into the case for this week, the Saeed sisters. So this story actually starts off with the story of Yasser Saeed and Patricia Owens. So Yasser Saeed was an Egyptian immigrant who came to the US with his family in 1983 on a student visa. Yasser was the oldest of 5 siblings, which included him along with 3 brothers and 1 sister. Him and his family ended up settling in a little town called Bedford, Texas, where they all worked at a local convenience store. And it was at this convenience store that Yasser met Patricia Owens. So Patricia Owens grew up in Bedford, Texas, and she was just a normal American girl. She lived in the apartments next to the convenience store and frequented it often. And I guess she caught one of the guy's eyes, and one of them caught her eyes because she ended up dating Yasin Saeed. So not Yasser, but Yasin, you heard that correctly, who is Yasser's younger brother. So yeah, she dated him first, and they were together for a little while, and Yasin actually asked for Patricia's hand in marriage at one point. I don't know what happened, but I guess eventually they broke up and she decided to move on to Yasser. She said, let's just keep it in the family. Why not? And Yasser actually ended up asking for her hand in marriage eventually as well. Patricia's family wasn't too keen on this idea, and it wasn't for the reasons you might think. It's not like there was any cultural issues or any familial issues. It was because at the time, Patricia was 15 and Yasser was 29. Yes, so there was a 14-year age gap between them. And again, her family was not too fond of this. But I guess Yasser was very persuasive, and he just kept breaking them down and telling them, I'll take such good care of her. My family has money. We have land in Egypt. I'm going to treat her so well. She won't have to worry about a thing. And again, the reason he had to was because she was 15 and she was not legally able to consent to marriage. Of course, all of her family members were trying to convince her not to. They were telling her, this isn't a great idea. You're too young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You have so much time to find somebody else. But I guess Patricia was keen and she thought Yasser was the one. So eventually they got married, and that was that. However, in the documentary, The Honor Killing, where I got a lot of this information from for this story, Patricia was actually quoted as saying, "I don't think it was love. I think it was just that we were so poor. I just wanted to get out of the house. I don't think it was love. I think I grew to love Yasser." She also stated that soon after they went to get married, Yasser went to apply for his green card since he was still here on a student visa. Yikes, yeah. And she said in the beginning of the marriage, everything was great and they didn't really have any issues. But about 6 or 7 months in, Yasser allegedly started to become controlling and abusive. Per Patricia, he didn't want her to interact with any of her family members because they were Americans and Americans were quote unquote bad. Yasser also had a job as a cab driver, but he rarely ever worked, and as a result, Patricia had to pick up shifts and work more so that they could make ends meet. And then as time went on, he became more and more averse to the American lifestyle and would say all the time to her that he made a mistake marrying an American wife. There were also nights when Yasser would come home late from work, and while Patricia was sleeping, he would nudge her or kick her to wake her up. Then he would pour things out of dressers and drawers and make her clean it up. Yeah, very strange and obviously abusive. And then eventually she said that at some point he started cheating on her as well. And he had 6 affairs that she knew of. 6. Ugh, okay. And then Yasser also apparently had a violent past, which involved an incident in Egypt where he ran over one of his co-workers. So apparently one of his co-workers made him upset. Don't know exactly what he did, but Yasser decided to retaliate by running this person over with his car. This person ended up dying, and his dad used their money to cover the whole thing up. He would also make Patricia pose for these disturbing pictures, like one where he had her holding a machine gun, and Patricia is not smiling in this picture. There's no laughter, there's no joy. It's just like dead eyes with her holding a machine gun. And then there was another picture where he is holding a knife to her throat. And again, both of them in the picture look very serious, very stern. I'm not sure what the point of these pictures was, but in any respect, very disturbing. So I can only imagine how the power dynamics played out in this relationship. As I mentioned, Patricia was 15, 16. At that age, your frontal lobe isn't fully developed. There's so many other things going on. You just aren't making good decisions. Clearly, he married a 15-year-old for a reason, and it's just very upsetting to think about. I can't imagine what was going through her mind in any given moment. So, yeah. And then, like any other woman in an abusive relationship, Patricia would put up with it and then leave for a day or two when she got fed up and go back. And it was just a continuous cycle. On top of all of that, in the midst of all this, they had 3 kids. So their first child was their son Islam Saeed, who Patricia had when she was 16. Their second child was Amina, who Patricia had when she was 17. And their third child was Sarah, who Patricia had when she was 18. So she literally popped out 3 kids in the span of 3 years, all before she was legally an adult or able to drink alcohol. Wild. I can't imagine. However, as I mentioned, this story is going to be centered around the Saeed sisters. Alright guys, well, thanks for listening to Erased. Before we go, if you found this podcast generally enjoyable, please show some love by subscribing and or leaving a review on Apple Podcast. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you have any cases you would like to suggest for an upcoming episode, please email the pod at erase.podcast@gmail.com or reach out on social media at the links provided in the description. Also, don't forget to enter the Erased Holiday Giveaway. Winners will be announced on Christmas Day, and details on how to enter are on our website. Alright guys, well, love you, and stay tuned for next week's tale of a woman erased.